I will mute myself.
What was this? Okay, no, thank you kindly. Yeah, today's the working group call for Stacks governance. Call number 80, actually. It's good to be back. I think we had some quite a bit of time off when it comes to holidays here in the US at least. And yeah, we're looking forward to turnout picking back up, particularly after some of the 2.1 run. But also, hopefully with some of the Stacks Advocates governance flows flowing into this particular call. We know that not everybody can join with the time zones spread out pretty wide, but if there are any needed changes to the call, we can make that as well. But also, we have the recordings for folks to follow along, hopefully fairly easily, accessible on the GitHub pages for the StacksGov GitHub. Well, yeah, we'll get into it. I'll make sure folks are
Yeah.
we usually start with some stand-ups, and I can get us going. What we've been focused on in terms of advocates is really the wrapping up of this GovLab residency, making sure that folks understand the things coming up in the future. There's some changes coming or already happened in terms of the stacking pool. There's been a big core part of the Stacks Advocates program in terms of weekly distributions. And with the close of this community stacking pool, at least for the time being, it gives us some time to rethink and rethink the shape of the Did It Things channel, rethink the shape of some of the funding distribution models for advocates as well. Some of the updates included what is a revival of what we call journeys. And it's essentially our approach as advocates to supplementing the grants program. And it really is something born out of advocates, folks like Hero and others, a part of the building out of the spec and then the actual implementation. I was able to play with the bot and the Clarity tooling from Haas a little bit back when we first implemented it, earlier in the year when we were expecting some efforts to go alongside the grants program while it was still changing. And now, with things kind of settling out again in the current form of the grants program, we want to be sure that there's a viable option for the community for decentralized architecture for community-led funding by the turn of the quarter. And so we'll be reaching out and have been reaching out to folks that have already found rhythms in certain aspects of the community, whether that be wanting to build for open source paths and core development or build towards more noob related Clarity education, things like this. Started to reach out to some of the folks in the community. Algorithm, Techie, Akanksha have been some of the people that seem to be some of the first quality teams forming, and we see other folks bubbling up as well in different Stacks chapters even. So we'll be reaching out to them as well, to make sure that this tooling gets polished. Believe we have Haas back with us this week to help make sure that the tooling gets nice and revived, in the server, folks to play with and tinker with. We'll get more into that later, but a lot of what we'll be focused on is making sure folks are clear about some of these updates, and that some of the teams that we've mentioned are falling into some nice efforts in polishing up that tooling, as it can be one of the nice things that came out of Advocates DAO in terms of open source tooling, along with some of the governance tooling. And we'll touch on that a little bit later too. I want to do a briefing for folks that are extremely critical for our consensus rounds. Right now, we have some discussion points up in the review proposal channel, and the idea of this is to get going an effective retroactive, right, to the 2.1 upgrade. try to get things going while the vote was still happening. If it could impact, more voters. But it seems like we had some nice turnout, even without a lot of the supplement of the Advocates DAO to do so. So now a lot of the focus will be on a retroactive dialogue that has some very clear action items, hopefully through the cabs, making sure folks understand the SIPs editing processes is open to them for any of the any of the action items that come up in the retrospective of the 2.1 upgrade. But yeah, I'll shut up now and pass the block and pass the updates to someone else if they're interested to give a brief stand up on what they've been working on. Even if it's slightly governance related, we'd love to hear it, or if any of this sparked anything for folks. I don't foresee any blockers in terms of some of what we're trying to get done for the rest of this month. There's some other things going on in regards to gathering data that are important for the reemergence of the stacking pool that maybe we touch on later too. That's one blocker, and in some ways is gathering this data. Jenny's helping us with, and we've already started to collect most of the data that we need from the current cohorts. So yeah, I'll pass it on. If Hero, if you have anything for us, or any of the other folks here with us. And here, I know you may be in a couple calls at once, or maybe you just missed the queue. But it's
do you want, should I? I was saying if other people want to talk about anything.
Yes.
I'm happy to give an update. So on my side, yeah, everything to do with Stack Supermon, getting people out to vote, showing people how to vote. In fact, Sting and John's being very sort of loyal attendees of these calls. They come on and ask questions about how to vote, whether in Xverse or Stack Discord, and then they voted with me. So yeah, it's great to see them taking part in this Stack Supermon voting, because it is all about governance. So yeah, so on my end, just doing everything that I can to amplify and educate people on Stack Supermon, and sorting out any sort of loose end documentation, or working with the developers to get the website up and running with the voting coming to a close. So the results need to be displayed. So we just sort of finishing on that, and you can go and visit the result page too. So all this stuff will serve the future sort of building blocks for more governance process, whether it be from hard fork, or perhaps another hard fork like this, or could be community oriented stuff. So yeah, I think if we have a good platform developed like this, yeah, something that we can utilize always as an ecosystem. Yeah, so that's sort of the main stuff from my side.
Beautiful. Maybe some more details come up later in the call as we go through some things.
Maybe let's get John or Sting to share their experience. What about this? So John or Sting, do you want to share a little bit what you think about the process? How did you find the way we encourage people to come and participate in this governance process? Do you think there's anything that you want to community want to do more, or we can help do more of? Yeah, so any thoughts would be, I'm curious to hear. He's in the swimming pool. He can't speak. Yeah, John, if you want to unmute, feel free. But if not, it's also okay. But yeah, we'll be asking more feedback in the future.
I see Diego connecting. Welcome, Diego. We're just starting off here. We're really going through some stand-up updates, and we're just going around the floor quickly, asking folks their experience of the current 2.1 upgrade and the voting processes. It's beautiful to have you, Mai. Feel free to give us a small intro. I know you just hopped in, and give us some thoughts of stand-ups, anything that you've been up to, or your thoughts on the governance or the processes of the 2.1 upgrade so far.
Hey, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, well, thanks. I was trying to join the previous call, so I'm glad to hop on this just to see what's going on. But I'm super excited for the 2.1 upgrades, and I think it's also an opportunity for us to reach a more mature governance system. So I'm excited to see that we're on the road to decentralization. I do think it's 2-3 years down the line, but this is definitely a great beginning, and I couldn't be more excited. Currently working on BitFlow, and the 2.1 updates is a huge leverage for us and where we want to go, and I also think that there's a lot of symmetry going on in the ecosystem. I think everyone is sharing the same vision, so excited to be here.
Thank you kindly, Mike. Thank you kindly for the insights and the lens on the 2.1 upgrade so far. And hopefully the flows have been nicely with the ecosystem DAO. I think it's been beautiful. They've come in a very clutch way, in very crunch time frame, to have something fairly polished for the community. I don't know, it'll just continue to get polished as we go forward. So I'm looking forward to the retrospective and some feedback, akin to yours, as things go forward. So thank you kindly, y'all. We can get into some of these. We usually go through the stand-ups and then let these labels guide us through some of the discussion points that may be important for folks to see. And it usually brings up some things that maybe we haven't touched on as some of the core folks in these calls in some time as well. So yeah, this is, I know, kind of left off in the form of a grant proposal that didn't go through. But myself and Hero, if I'm not mistaken, had some discussions in these calls for folks who weren't with us around, and sorry for any background noise here, around, going forward with this as a community, even without a grant, perhaps. Maybe this makes up, if there absolutely has to be a grant, maybe it's one of the things that some of the tooling that I referenced earlier can help with. But I think where we left off was just going forward with folks who are interested in picking up some of these work streams as it relates to a community representative. There's a lot of legal constraints and requirements that are important for somebody actually sitting on the board and actually participating in any of the board meetings and things like this. It relates to passing to and fro community sentiment, and there's likely an in-between space where I think Ragnar and folks were trying to address and get compensated for it. But I think where we left off is finding somebody who is willing to do some of this due diligence before it's a compensated role, and see if it's something that is viable for the foundation, in terms of something that is seen as a high point of value for them and for the community. And we're sure that compensation will follow after, especially if it comes a fairly robust responsibility or responsibility amongst the team even. And so these are some of the conversations that we left off on, and it's a fairly important thing to keep consistent on, while we have folks coming in. So if this sparks anything for any of you guys that sounds interesting, and just let us know here, or you have anything to add to the discussion, let us know in a session like this, and we'll likely get it included into this thread here. But yeah, let me know.
I will say something about this. This issue that's on GitHub, it's been there for ages. I think the way we take this approach of just reporting this issue, it's not going to make any changes, right? If we want to actually do something about it, we cannot be reactive and just say, oh, this thing, and people jump in. On a critical issue like this, if you really want to get it moved on, so like my personal approach would be perhaps get Ragnar on, get a few different folks on together in the same room, because I think if we don't proactively do that, we're still gonna talk about this issue this time next year, and we're just gonna say, yeah, folks, do you have any thoughts? Yeah, that's not gonna, it's okay, but I think to make material changes or step forward, it's almost better, because we'd had time and nothing has been actually changed much step-wise. We haven't moved the step forward. So I'm just thinking, like, how do we get step forward? And I think perhaps it's for you to contact these stakeholders and get them together and actually have a proper conversations, because they are not just going to suddenly turn up one day here. And even if he does, it'd be just like a few of us in the room. That's not enough to move the needle. We need more people in this conversation. Maybe you need to arrange a Twitter space with all the necessary stakeholders or whatever in Discord called, without taking actual material step forward, it's not going to change the situation. So do we want to change the situation or not? I guess it's a question we need to ask. If we do, yeah, I think proper step.
If I may add to that, I totally agree with what you're saying, and I've experienced this with City Coins, right? We would start with 40, 50 people in a call, and then it's down to 5 or 6, and then the decision makers or the leaders or the people that are actually putting out these proposals were not participating, and then we would have 3 or 4 calls that wouldn't go anywhere. And I think that's an issue with all of the protocols that we have today. There's not enough incentive for even, to say, Ragnar, stop your work and come join this meeting, right? Even that simple action it requires some resource, right? So maybe we couldn't get a full grant to do a complete overhaul, but could there be some sort of incentive for these people to start participating? And who are the decision makers that from the Stacks Foundation that needs to be part of this type of call? Because or else it ends up going into, like you mentioned, into a loop and going nowhere.
Yeah, I think this call, even in this case of Ragnar, right? We see Brittany hop in here, and she even hopped onto one of these sessions, right? I think Ragnar wasn't able to join us on that day, but we were able to get the recording to him, right? And I think Ragnar first saw it, just how you're seeing us go over it now, Diego, and just it was one of these rare cases where somebody was proactive to jump on that, what is still very much an opportunity to contribute in an important way, as Hiro was saying. But it is very much the case that you lay out, Diego, right, in terms of a spreading thin of resources, right? A lot of the community being heavy involved in heavily involved in multiple aspects of the ecosystem already, or maybe like in this case had tried to commit to the task at hand, and the grant didn't go through, right? And so I think that's one of the reasons why myself and Hero kind of tailed off on finding folks who the incentive is enough, right? In the ability to impact the community in such a important way, that some of the work starts getting done or starts coming together in some framework, the same way that Ragnar did. And even before we get to a grant stage, right, we can maybe have some input and feedback coming from folks like Brittany or others as to what are our best steps forward for folks that are interested in pursuing this one step further. And yeah, to your point, Hero, we can try to reach out to some of the folks who were interested before, but I think you had the right notion too in finding folks who are up to this task even before the grant is necessarily a sure thing. But yeah, we can facilitate this in different ways, right? The Twitter Space is a good way. I think there was some recent conversation around some interactive spaces and things like this. It seems like we can really hone in on this, particularly in the we've had conversations about D work and things like this in advocates, and I can see that becoming that much more important as we start to revive journeys, as I gave a little introduction to in the beginning of this session, where there should be a whole lot more opportunity to iterate on what Ragnar had started up, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes in terms of finding personnel that have the spoons for it. But if we focus in on it and put it up as a high community priority, I'm sure we'll see folks gather around it. And hopefully, if not an individual, a team can help distribute some of the responsibilities of something like this. And I think this is where we tailed off last time, and we just need to, as you said, Hero, double down on getting some events.
Yeah, for me, it doesn't matter what happened last time, personally. All I care is what we're going to do in the future. So what are we going to do in the future to ensure this is not just reporting every week or every other week? Yeah, because this has been a looming thing since like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, from what I'm hearing from some of the older folks in the ecosystem. So nothing is being materially done about it. Yeah, to Diago's point, with regard to incentives, have you seen any good models for this kind of stuff around that we can pick brains on?
Good question. I think when the market is in the bull market, you have a lot of people that are motivated because they're making some money, and they're making something regards of their participation, or indirectly they're making money, and therefore they feel motivated to participate. In bear markets, it's a little bit of a challenge, but I do think some service guilds that have created community board members or community boards, right? So first you say, okay, before we make any decisions, before we submit any proposals, how about the community votes on who they want to be represented by, or who should we put on the community board? And can we allocate X amount of, let's in this case, stacks to the community board so that we can pay for their time? I think that would be the first step, right?
Like that.
I have, and then from that point on, like I have 5-6 names on top of my head that would like to be on this call. You probably have a bunch and so forth. And then once we say, okay, now that is approved, now we have a community board, these people are getting paid, there's transparency about it, there's the wallet address, I mean, everything. Like, this is the people that's going to be in that call regardless of other community members. then we can say, okay, now what's the first issue? Oh, the first issue, we want to be more transparent about salaries, or we want to be more transparent about the protocols roadmap, or we want to have a page. That's when the issues come in. But I think
Yeah,
most of my participations in protocols or such as this is because I have some skin in the game indirectly, and I think we may need to flip that model.
yeah. No, I like where you're going along. And in fact, it is something that because I am currently sort of helping this indirectly or directly through the work of Stacks residency that I'm sort of working on. And it is something that we've even talked about briefly over the past couple of months. And even before 2 months ago, when I initially started the residency, even floated the idea of using Ecosystem DAO as a facilitator to decide who those community members could be. Because with the functionality of the Ecosystem DAO, which the one you're using to vote, that website you can actually dedicate, like you can, I think you can vote for the person, but even if you feel like you are not knowledgeable enough to make a decision, you can delegate your vote to someone else, say Harold, and Harold can vote for whoever he wants to nominate because you trust Harold's knowledge in the governance process, and he nominates, say, Marvin to be part of the board. So I think that's almost like something that potentially I could help facilitate the development of maybe next year. That is a possibility. And even right now, for example, we have a lot of CAD members, so SIP editors that we're trying to almost grow that support system to facilitate all their SIP proposals or ideas. And that almost in itself perhaps requires some sort of incentive. We are very lucky right now that many people have almost like volunteered to be part of that. But I think that may also require a little bit more incentive. And it is something slightly separate to this particular Ragnar's issue, but it's almost kind of indirectly linked.
Thank you kindly, Hero. John, you had something on your mind you wanted to add?
No, I have nothing to say.
John is a 14-year-old NFT artist on Stacks. He's been like learning Clarity, launching his own art. Pretty cool. And he's participating in lots of calls and stuff like that. Yeah, so it's really great to see him even like, I can't remember what I was doing at 14, like jumping onto a governance call. Definitely no way. So good on you. Yeah, Diego, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I like where your head is at, and I've seen, like, I think it was Harmony Protocol that they were talking about creating a Harmony rewards program. So the DAO would launch like bounties, and these bounties could be, hey, we're looking for a solution to this, or we're looking for an article for this, or we need help to create a proposal, or we keep a ledger of who's participating in these types of community calls, and we give a point system, sort of like, miles programs or rewards programs that can be exchanged for Stacks tokens. Because I think that this model could be replicated across all of the other protocols in the system, if it was possible to create sort of a rewards program, because we're talking about Web3 and blockchain, but we're doing these meetings in Web2 format, right? um, we're using Zoom or we're using Discord, and there's no there's no historical data, there's no tracking, there's no, there's nothing. So we don't know, like, I don't know if Hito participated in 50 calls or 5, and I don't know if I participated in 50 or 5, and I think tracking is the first step, rewarding is the second, and maybe not a fixed salary, but some sort of, you participate in 5 calls, you're able to get X amount of rewards, and then you can exchange your rewards for whatever. But it's fairly new for everybody, but it just seems like we tend to talk about these governance models, but we're not even using the most basic tools and functionalities that our own protocol offers us, right? We're just trying to keep it all on paper and pen, or via email, and I think that's something that maybe would be nice for someone to solve. It would be an application that I would use, but I think some sort of rewards program would be nice.
And what's the Citicoin's current sort of reward sort of system right now to incentivize people to participate in the governance?
Well, there isn't, which is the
Okay.
reason, some calls will have 3 people now instead of 40, which is, that's the main reason of, like, we've seen like a smaller and smaller participation. Besides ideas not going forward, people, like, I spent maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 months on CityCash, which was a side project to create a stable coins using the Citicoins protocol and proof of transfer, etc. I wrote many articles, I wrote slideshows, pages and pages of research, 40 hours of meetings, and that did not go forward. And that kind of, creates a scenario where I'm not motivated enough to keep on contributing, right? And I think we can learn from that type of exchange. But I've seen this across multiple protocols that I participate, where there's not enough incentive to keep the momentum going. And I think we have to kind of rethink, how we distribute these rewards, and how do we incentivize people to continue on sharing, creating Twitter posts, coming into Discord, participating in these calls. I think that's what's missing.
Yeah, sounds good. I agree very much. Most of everything what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it's very adjacent to even what's happening with this most recently, right? Like it took some time to put some of this together, right, from Ragnar's perspective. And yeah, if he is one of the people we contact again, he'd have to consider, his balance things out, weigh things out, whether or not he wants to continue in that direction. But maybe we'll touch on some of the things that relate to this a little bit later on as well. I know, Diego, you missed some of what we spoke on earlier in terms of journeys, and I know, Hiro, you're more familiar with it than others, but maybe we have a little bit more time to touch on it as we go through some of these issues. And John, hopefully we didn't skip over you. I saw you unmute a couple times. I wasn't sure if you had something to add here, but wanted to make sure that we see you. Okay.
And I do think, like, we need to get more people from the governance cap on this call, because otherwise it's just you always, and we need more I mean, ignore the incentives things aside. I think we need something like a proper group. Otherwise, I mean, or it's just a Discord thing. I don't know. Do we want people to participate in this call? Like Diego is like a great like he jumped on. So I do think like there is value in opening up this call to more people. And I like the little advert that you done today on that. And that's the first time I've seen. And we got a couple of people on. So like I think the more people that can jump on this call, the better, incentive aside. And including all the governance people. Like we got 5 people on the governance cap. Like when is a good time for you guys to come together, facilitate these calls?
Yeah, we can double check. You know, there's a little bit of there could be a change in the time too. You know, if there are folks that want to become more consistent in it, you know, we're pretty spread out across time zones, which I was part of that incentives discussion too. But yeah,
And maybe we can have it like topic specific. Like otherwise it gets diluted. Like we talk about the work and this thing continuously, the same thing, like 5% of each, but we end up with nothing. So maybe it's almost to have like a topic focus for that week
yeah.
or other week. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's, you know, even some of the calls, right? Even today, right? Like we might, you know, depending on the folks that are in the call, right? Especially, there might be more topic heavy, right? I believe, you know, calls like this, you know, similar calls like this is what actually led to Ragnar, you know, attempting that, right? And hopefully calls like this will, you know, spark us in the direction again to get to a similar stage of somebody, you know, getting something down and going. And yeah, yeah, I think that this is a similar thing for getting folks that are already involved in governance other places. Like you said, we're very lucky that they're even involved in those cabs, and we've tried to reach out to them, you know, in some recent weeks to come into this call. But having something topic specific, like I reached out to Juliet this morning to try to confirm if she was coming, because then I could, you know, include in the advertisement, we could have a focus on the code of conduct, right? And maybe that would draw some more folks in from a broader lens. But yeah, I agree that having some topic and maybe even some coordination ahead of time to maximize interaction could be the best to get folks into governance call with the topic focus can kind of bury the governance aspect, which I think makes folks, you know, run and hide a little bit, just a little bit. But yeah, some of the updates here going into November. Actually, you know, I wanted to touch on some of the nice points you made, and I'll probably include a link here as well for folks who may maybe see this recording or see this clip of recording. You know, that it can have a nice view of what you had put down here as to what would be nice to see in some of our consensus rounds in Advocates DAO. And for those of you who don't know, we have these channels dedicated to governance right inside the Advocates section of the Stacks Discord. And we have a lot of work from Haas tinkering with this research coming out of Harvard and Oxford's MetaGov and Policy Kit. And this allows us to, you know, submit proposals through our clan design in Advocates DAO, where we have representatives across 3 clans, 6 clans, as we have made sure to have that the female participants inside of Advocates DAO could have autonomous processes for decision making, and all the clans have these autonomous processes for decision making that come together via the review proposal channel, kind of showing what's been going on in the respective clan channels. And this is nice to kind of streamline what could be gridlock with everybody in the same place. It's also nice for tracking, as you mentioned, Diego, of you know, not just the voices of women in Web3 and Stacks, ecosystems and things like this as well via some of the functions built into the clans. And you know, we've had different iterations where all of the decision making was happening in the same thread, all in one place. And one of the things that comes across really quickly to your point, Diego, is that in the long term, there's really no way of tracking for particularly genuine autonomy in decision-making processes where there's a lot of nuances of interference that could potentially happen between individuals, and particularly when the more complex dynamics of the long term, and to ensure that voices of women don't get drowned out, and have that built into the structures has been really important to us. And so this is where even some of the of our representatives are for the female clans are some of our newest members in the Advocates DAO. Akanksha, Good Kitty have just came in and have dedicated themselves to governance processes now without the incentive of compensation, even, right, to some of our points here today. So I think these are other names that become extremely important for folks that are willing to dedicate just for the incentive of contributing to the community in an important way, particularly the voices of ensuring voices of women are accounted for and have representatives for them. And so so this requires a lot of facilitation in the way of the representatives, because if you're just a clan member sitting in a clan, the discussion points for 2.1, for example, maybe don't come across you all in the same nice concise blurb, right? But inside of this consensus flow, it can, right? And one of the things that Hiro, I think, touched on really nicely is how important it would be for representatives to get right into that review proposal channel and not just give us updates on what's been going on in their clans, but facilitate real-time calls. Has always been an ethos that we wanted to encourage inside of the Advocates DAO consensus flows. And so that these individual clans can come together real time or async if they need to. But what's really important is that the clan members see the representatives getting active in some way or form in terms of scheduling, coordinating, getting important discussion topics out there towards important action items, which is the hope in terms of the retrospective approach that we're taking to 2.1 proposal, the different processes, right? We have some discussion points in there around the rider SIPs and the sunset phases and things like this that are changed in the upgrade, and important ways forward to seeing some of these things through. So yeah, through the cabs and through the SIPs editing processes too, this can be a really official way for folks to get involved in anything that came to mind during these processes of the 2.1 upgrade. So this is something that we'll be passing around in the form of this clip of this recording, but also encouraging the representatives to make the most of this this learning process of 2.1 and facilitate important dialogues towards action items in their respective clans. And we'll do our best on Twitter and other aspects of the community to get folks filing into those clans as a means to have their voices heard in a bottom-up way, right? And maybe we see this grow into adjacent efforts to the community representatives and things like this. If folks find the flows easy to participate in, find the incentive of coming together, bringing each other's voices together and implementing something as incentive enough for the time being, we can see this evolve into some of what we discussed earlier, potentially as some quality teams that they're focusing on community representation. And this is ultimately what the clan design is all about. And
yeah. I will chime in and say I like the concept and I like the design. I think it's just not used enough or tested out enough to know whether it's works in real life, because it all looks nice on paper, but we haven't fed through enough things. So I would recommend that we feed through enough things. But obviously feeding through enough things takes the representative to also sort of facilitate that along. And it's always been the issues of advocates that the new clan representative aren't active. So if they are the one that set the tone for everybody else, if they are not active, even if you have a great system design underneath, like the reps aren't setting the right tone for the rest of the community, and that is a problem. And we cannot continue to allow that to happen, because we got a good underneath design out there, but the reps aren't doing almost their job almost, but it's not their job, obviously, because there's no direct incentive right now. But at least they should set a tone and be on shepherd the people along, like regularly on a daily basis, or at least, not like every 1 week. If you leave without talking to people every 1 week, which is what's happening now, I haven't seen anybody talk about Stacks 2.1 from the reps since the review proposal been posted. And I just think that is not meeting the roles and responsibility of the representative. If you're talking about just an average member, then it's okay. I can get that. But it's really important, like, to kick off this actual concept, MVP, that we have the right people at least to get it started and set the right tone for the rest of the advocates community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been quite a process every time, in finding the reps, finding rep changes, right? So it's been very appreciative though of previous rounds of the reps being as active as they can, particularly the newer members who have even less understanding than folks like yourself in terms of the flow, and have still found themselves being able to facilitate it throughout their clans. And in this 2.1 run, we've seen some initial sparks from Merrick and Desiree inside that review proposals channel, and we haven't gotten so much back from the other reps, and it's hard, right? To all of the reps are pretty good understanding as they sign up to what we expect and what's desired out of a rep in terms of consistency and being there when we need them. And but a lot of it too, right? It's one thing is to facilitate, and then to facilitate, there needs to be some reciprocity, right? And so even in that's why I think the coordinating of calls and actually building in these scheduling efforts into the reps roles, I think would be the next step to make it explicit and maybe even more explicit, I should say, and maybe just help the reps come into a rhythm of scheduling within this context of the AdvocSDAO governance processes, because I think that'll help things along. As it seems like folks are coming in when they have the time. It's a rough one, particularly because this is that much more active and can be that much more useful than even the SIPS process, right? In terms of issues that are being actively picked up on the ground and put through. So I think that can be the bulk of the incentive, and it just has to be seen as being used. And I think this 2.1 upgrade is still one of the best chances to show that in a broad way. So we'll continue to be pushing. And I know you may have seen some efforts on Twitter of mine of tagging the reps, and and I've seen them. I've been appreciative of them doing some due diligence of communicating folks getting into clans and things like this. So we'll continue to try to push that much harder to get both folks in the clans and to have some nice facilitation from the reps. And I think their voices too will be, I'm sure, much needed here. It's not just myself and you, saying, oh, they should be more active. I'm sure they have good reasons for, and whether it be understandings of the flows that could be better, or it could be just time in general, or that good old incentives topic that we've touched on a couple of times here. But yeah, I think it's possible. And there's a few other things here that I'll mention briefly before moving off of that topic completely, which is An update here that I think some of you have seen that is important, kind of wrapping up some of the research and development lab, the Gov Labs residency. Some inclusion of how Journeys is coming back, hopefully by next quarter as an option for decentralized architecture. And this is what I was referring to earlier, Diego. Maybe you've heard it in some of the city coins as well. Maybe I just spoke about some of the consensus flow efforts there. But Haas built this beautiful Clarity code, about 200 lines, nice and tight, that allows for DAO creation right inside the Discord, the sending of different cryptocurrencies to each other right inside the Discord. And the idea for this was, it allows for decision making of, funding a DAO and things like this. I think Clarity version 2 may even make it more flexible in terms of adding and removing folks to the DAO. And this is all, has a model tied around it and with specs and things like this. But it was all an effort to ensure we have some type of decentralized architecture for community-led funding with accountability mechanisms built into the model, the decision-making mechanisms, allowing for accountable distribution of the funding in these ways, and allows for each little project or each little grant writing process to become a DAO team, and can hopefully supplement things. But this is where we're trying to point folks in this direction again, but for the turn of the quarter, so that we can polish that up. I think I was tinkering with it the last time earlier in the year before the grants program went through some changes, and it seems like it's settling out again after the last cohort not having so much or any rewards of grants. And so, to have an option, a viable option there for the community is what we're hoping for by the turn of the quarter, and working with folks like Algorithm, Akanksha, other folks they seem to be forming into some nice teams with some nice focus, and could be a good example of quality grant writing, and with the proper accountability mechanisms all built into the user experience, so the tooling and things like this. And so yeah, I think this is maybe where we can see those incentives kind of merge of both community support, which is an incentive in and of itself, in help of grant writing and just general support, but it also puts some power in the hands of the community in terms of what they feel should be funded and what they feel is accountable, mechanisms of accountability. And maybe this is something that dovetails with some of the things the foundation has learned with the current grants program and its deliverables and keeping folks accountable and things like this. Maybe we can build it in that much more into some type of DAO architecture and Clarity code that Haas has put together. But yeah, we also have the closing of the community pool, which allowed for weekly distributions from the source cred algorithm running in the background of our Did It Things channel. With that closing down, with the closing of our residency, it can change shape. The algorithm can still take account of contributions coming in. You can still tinker with the weights to play with the evaluation of those contributions. And we can use this and build it into traits of NFTs. Haas has been working on NFTrees project for some time and thinking about linking, these Did It Thing contributions coming from all different angles in the ecosystem, linking that to some type of reputation buildup right in these NFTs. And, some of the Journey spec includes a particular angle on reputation when it comes to observe, the actual distribution of funds that are built into the Clarity code. And this could be yet another angle, right? In the current grants program, when the applications include really nice layouts of community support, and even some information that you didn't know before, through that some of that showed support, is one of the nicer things. to determine if the team can execute what's being put on in the application. And this can be yet another angle, right? We have an easy angle for core contributors that have been here for a long time as being one of the points of reputation and accountability in the model. But for folks newer to the ecosystem, this could be, you know, how the changing shape of DIDIthink factors into community-led funding as well, and how it plays into you know, the process of folks coming together in these in the writing of these grants. And so yeah, you know, a lot of the community rep discussion we had earlier, I think, falls nicely in some of these tooling potentials. And you know, we're looking forward to how this rounds off towards the end of the month, with some of these teams leading the way on how to make this the best user experience possible. But yeah, you can find a lot of the open source code that I've referred to here, and some of the specs and some of the working docs of where we left off in all of this in this link here. But yeah, I'll try to shut up now, and I know we're 6 minutes after. If there's any questions or comments on any of this, let me know. And we can be sure to get this recording to folks. Thank you, man. Yeah, we have some other things that we usually go through here. I know there's some recent comments here from, here we are. Oh, thank you, Diego. And I'll be sure to keep you posted on this, try to find you on Discord around any of the teams forming around that tooling, and where we are in all of this. So at the end of this here, we have some comments from Juliet, Jude, and Trevor. You know, over the course of this thread, there's been some coming out of the work on the code of conduct, as you can see, going back for some time now, being led by Juliet mainly. And so she's come recently with the code of conduct in the form of a SIP. And I think this is mainly just her continuing to ask. We leave this thread open as we continue to iterate on the code of conduct and ask for comments from folks. So that's essentially what this is. Hopefully we get some more on this from her tomorrow. I believe Hiro has a meeting scheduled specifically for this. So we'll likely be able to link that the recorded minutes from that here. I spoke on DWork task a little bit earlier. You know, this has a whole site reserved for it in the website of the Advox DAO. And it will likely be a point of focus. I think a lot of what Diego, yourself, and Haas spoke to, or Hiro spoke to earlier was a lot like wish list making, right, or wish list grants making. For those of us who are more familiar with what's needed in that community rep role, we can make it a lot easier for folks to fall into you know, some of those work streams, this, you know, regardless of the incentives available at the time. If it's easier to just fall into, as opposed to, you know, folks having to wrap their heads around the history or do some of the feedback work that I think is needed to structure out what the foundation would like to see and be the most comfortable with. It's something that the DWork board would be very nice to, you know, to facilitate things like this, as well as, you know, nudge folks in other directions as they come into advocates, which will be another part of how DIDIthink changes. As of now, it was fairly open, right, or fairly organic when we wanted to nudge folks towards a more stacks-related area, more open source-related area than closed source. And I think we can have more of a solid team focusing on more timely contributions for what's going on in the ecosystem, folks repeating much needed work or coming into quality teams, things like this. It doesn't necessarily prescribe or discourage what folks are already doing. I think that's a beautiful part of what the DIDIthink channel offers right now for peer-to-peer contributions and evaluations. But it can make what they're doing better or more impactful in certain ways. So we're asking folks to add to that consideration. You can find that in that same link. You can find a working doc for some of the considerations. And you know, DIDIthink channel has been a big part of Advox DAO so far. But yeah, we'll round off here as we are closing in on the hour. It looks like we wouldn't have much else other than some cleanup from Jason. And yeah, some older discussion points from us. But yes, we'll get this clipped up and share the recording for folks as soon as possible. And thank you kindly for your time, everybody here today. And we'll make sure to get this out there for you guys.